I'm Brad Burge. I'm Director of Communications for the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, a nonprofit research company that's looking at beneficial uses of psychedelics and marijuana.
Right on. And how long have you been with MAPS?
I started with MAPS about 5 years ago as a volunteer, as an intern, and I've been on staff for about 2.5 years now.
Cool. So how did you become interested in psychedelic research?
Two ways, really, the mind and the heart, I would say. One, very intellectual. I was in school and I was interested in how we can think about technology in ways that let us use it to its greatest extent. Pharmaceutical drugs are a very powerful kind of technology, and so I was exploring the sudden transition, the explosion that we're seeing of research into Schedule I substances, prohibited substances, and how they're turning into legitimate medicines. So I had an intellectual interest in that, and all the different ways I could look at that. And then personally, I had personally experienced and known others who experienced that psychedelics used in certain ways with the right kinds of guidance could help overcome dependence on prescription medications, which I had used for a long time, and psychedelics helped me get past.
Some say that we're experiencing a psychedelic renaissance. What kind of interest, I guess rising interest, have you seen since you've been with MAPS?
MAPS has been around for 26 years now, so a lot of work has already been done to get us up to this point. But just in the last 5 years, since I've been watching MAPS change and evolve and grow from a small organization to a larger one, there have been a lot of changes. MAPS isn't the only organization working in the field. Hefter Research Institute, Beckley Foundation, and the Council on Spiritual Practices are all organizations that are working in this field. MAPS in particular is growing really fast right now because we're focused on clinical research. We're looking at moving these substances through the FDA approval process and really carefully evaluating in as many ways as possible the actual risks and benefits. So just in the last few years, our phase 2 research looking at treating PTSD with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy has expanded greatly. We have international trials now in Canada, in the US, and Israel. We're also working to start studies in Australia and the UK. So in addition to that, our education program has increased a lot. There's a lot more recognition that criminal justice approaches to the war on drugs just are not working, and that people continue to use psychedelics outside of clinical and medical therapeutic contexts and need support services. So MAPS has been sponsoring, helping with harm reduction services at festivals and events where young people are, and not just young people, also older people are using psychedelics and seeking compassionate support for that.
I guess, well, besides some of the hurdles that are, you guys have with going through government approval regarding the process of testing, what other major obstacles do researchers face where, I guess, in trying to get the approval for the research?
Well, interestingly, psychedelics have really experienced a breakthrough with the amount of regulatory permission that comes through for it. We've been able to establish very positive, co-constructive, collaborative relationships with the FDA and other government approval regulatory agencies, and that's required a lot of cultural work, a lot of careful demonstration, starting from very small studies, building up through larger studies, looking at the balance of risks and benefits. So the regulatory process itself has gotten a lot easier for psychedelics. Then again, it's very different when it comes to clinical research with marijuana, which has been shut down by the government. So we get these drugs like marijuana that are at the core of the war on drugs, and therefore government agencies are often more and more hesitant to relax restrictions to enable research.
Sure. Do you foresee one drug being easier to decriminalize or for medical purposes?
The best success that we've had in our research is with MDMA. Not MDMA by itself as a drug that would just be used alone, or even in combination with other drugs, but MDMA in combination with psychotherapy. There was a long history, actually, of use of MDMA in psychotherapy and psychiatry before it was even criminalized. That was actually the first use of it in the early 1970s up until the early 1980s when recreational use expanded a lot. So our research has shown, and our early phase 2 trials, leading up to the larger phase 3 studies that the FDA needs for approval. These phase 2 studies have shown that a significant proportion, actually, in our last published trial, 83% of the subjects with PTSD who went through the therapy, that's MDMA in combination with psychotherapy, after just 2 sessions, no longer qualified for PTSD after therapy. And then in addition, we were able to show that almost 4 years later those results were sustained. So you might think, well, just after a couple of sessions of MDMA you might feel pretty good. So you have this afterglow that just kind of makes you feel better. But when those results last for 4 years without these patients taking MDMA again, and we can see that there's really some lasting changes that are happening there, and being able to find a lasting, enduring treatment for some of the hardest forms of PTSD is really well poised to move MDMA all the way through the process.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
What was wrong with the original research studies, like say maybe in the 60s or 50s or even 70s, I don't know, whenever they took place?
Really the challenge early wasn't the research. The backlash that happened in the 1960s and 1970s was primarily a response to the recreational use, the use outside of research settings. When the drug war hysteria exploded, when psychedelics exploded onto the scene in the 60s with young people, there'd already been a lot of legitimate research. Psychiatrists, psychotherapists like Stan Groff and Claudio Naranjo, and many others, Ralph Metzner, Myron Stolaroff, pioneers of the psychedelic psychotherapy movement, were working with psychedelics in therapy and demonstrating positive results. When this drug war finally hit, it was a reaction to the expanded recreational use.
Can you tell me what some of the common misconceptions are that you find about psychedelics regarding the use for therapeutic practice?
Culturally, I like to think of culture in a sense as the set and setting for science. So our ideas about what science is and what it does, our ideas about what psychedelics are and what they can do for us or can't do for us, those shape what kinds of science we decide to do, what questions we ask. It shapes what kinds of answers scientists are able to get after doing their research. So, as a result of decades of prohibition, decades of drug war fueled hysteria, many years of misinformation and confusion over what psychedelics are and what their risks are and how they work in the body and brain, have made it really difficult for a lot of people to even consider psychedelics as a valid object of scientific study. So it's this preconception that we have of psychedelics as drugs that can only be abused, as drugs that we can only use to hurt ourselves, that are going to cause us to have visions or cause us to live in a separate reality. That prevents people from getting engaged with the research. If that's all we think they are, then we can't really engage with the research. So the new conception that we can create, and that we can create as a field of researchers and a broader community of people interested in psychedelics, we create a new image of psychedelics as medicines or as spiritual tools or technologies, or even just as neutral objects that we can use for any number of different reasons, for healing or for personal improvement or spiritual advancement. So there's all these different stories that we can tell about psychedelics, and we're in a position to change that now.
Cool. Well, how's that received amongst the general population of doctors?
It's interesting. In November in San Diego, there was a large gathering of psychiatrists. There was Diego Psychiatric and Mental Health Congress. This is a very large gathering of researchers and professionals, therapists, who are trying to find treatments for their patients. So MAPS brought information, materials about our treating PTSD with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy program, and hosted a booth in the convention hall surrounded by other pharmaceutical booths. And by and large, when the practicing therapists came by the booth, they didn't react to what you might predict with, oh, MDMA, isn't that ecstasy? That's so scary, that's a drug of abuse, what are you doing here? We didn't get that at all, but rather we got a lot of interest, a lot of curiosity. What is MDMA? How is it used? How are its effects? Does it have counterindications? Do you take it daily, once a week, twice a week? That answer was especially fun to answer because we get to say, oh, you only take it 2 times, which blows the minds of a lot of practicing psychiatrists because that's not what they're used to hearing from pharmaceutical companies. As a non-profit pharmaceutical company, we shift how doctors are thinking about medicines. They're used to being marketed to. They're used to having for-profit pharmaceutical companies come to them and say, get your patients to take this drug. It's good for this reason, and that reason, and another reason, and they're going to need to take it for the rest of their lives, and they might see some improvement. So when we offer the possibility of a lasting cure, of something that really addresses the core of symptoms of PTSD, they get really excited. Therapists and patients are really in need of treatments for PTSD. A full third of people who take medications or receive psychotherapy for PTSD don't respond to those and they don't get better. So among the medical community, there's a huge amount of receptivity for these treatments.
Cool. Do you think psychedelics, I guess, will ever be legal in our lifetime?
I think there's a very strong possibility that psychedelics will be legal in our lifetime. We're probably within, that is legal for medical use. We're probably 10 years away from making MDMA in combination with psychotherapy a legally approved prescription medicine. That is assuming the trials continue to show good results, and assuming we're able to continue generating the funding and the support that we need for those trials. So far we're not funded by any government agencies. We're not funded by major foundations that fund clinical research. It's all private foundations and individuals giving $5, $10, $10,000, whatever they can to help move our research forward. So with all this progress and a lot of work left to do, I think we can definitely make at least MDMA happen as a prescription medicine.
Right on. So, good.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Great questions.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you.